Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Indian Summer Festival and welcome here to Happy City. This is part of our Ideas series, a series of which we're very proud because it brings together really wonderful minds in conversation. This evening we have Happy City with Lucy Hyslop, Victor Chan, Charles Montgomery, and John Helliwell. And just after this, at 8 p.m., we have Urban Underbelly with Jeet Tayal, Anush Irani, Anakena Schofield, and Michael Turner, looking at the flip side, the dark side of cities. So the good news first, basically. And we really wanted to have this conversation not only on the city of Vancouver, but cities in general, as more and more we think of what does urban happiness or just what's the future of the city. And really, really proud and honored to have these speakers here tonight. And thank you all for being so generous with your time and your ideas and for being part of the festival. I'd like to thank a few of our sponsors who've made this evening possible. Our presenting sponsors, as a lot of people know, is SFU, Simon Fraser University, and we here at SFU Woodwards, who've been our cultural partners from the beginning. So thanks a lot to Rolly Lorimer here, Laurie Anderson, Am Johal, all dear friends and partners in this. And the presenting partners of the Idea series are Culturama, who are represented here by Narayanan and Ramya, who are here for every event, which is great to see. Culturama is an Indian magazine that is now going online that links expatriates and Indians abroad to India, which is in a way we're bringing India to you here, and so there's a synergy there. Well, I'll get out of the way and leave it to Lucy Hyslop to guide this conversation. I'm so pleased to have Lucy here because we have a lot of friends in common, and I didn't even know she was here until Charles told me that she's here. Lucy's been a journalist in the UK and in Vancouver, and she runs one of my favorite festivals in the world, the Port Elliot Festival in Cornwall. And so over to a seasoned festival hand, and I'll thank you again very much.
It's an absolute pleasure. Well, welcome everybody to Indian Summer. You can hear me okay? So we're all good. I just wanted to kick off with we were almost a bit late ourselves by doing all the Bhangra moves outside. So I just wondered if anybody else was there with me. Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm sweating. Yeah, it was good. Okay. And then anybody else did the hip-hop yoga? That was crazy. I couldn't even begin. No, he was, there's something not right. No, it's just, no, it was really good. So I think we are in our own happy little city here right now tonight. So thanks so much for coming. It's really, really fabulous. And who's here at the festival for the first time? A few. Well, it looks like a good few know how this will go. The festival has conjured up the best, beautiful minds in the city here tonight. It's a great honor to be moderating and be with you. And basically, we've got about an hour and sort of 10 minutes. And obviously, I'm going to be asking a few questions, keep the conversation going, hopefully. And you will hear very little from me after this first little bit. And who knows, maybe halfway through, we'll do a little bit of singing, I think, John? Yes? Who's up for a bit of singing? Just, won't be too long, but yeah? I feel my job is done. It's really over. It's really going to be over to you. And at the end of that, we will have, obviously, a good chunk of time to have some questions. So I'm really looking forward to that. As I said, we'll be wrapping around 7:15. And a little housekeeping, obviously, in terms of phones, if you could turn them off. If you tweet, just keep it on the vibrate. So that should be good. Because tonight we're going to feast on the... Yeah, that means you, Charles. Yeah, I know what a tweeter you are. So tonight we're going to feast on the spiritual, the urban, and the economic factors of happiness from our well-known authors. As I'm sure you know, these three wonderful gentleman. Victor Chan co-founded the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education here in Vancouver with the Dalai Lama. And the pair's friendship dates more than 4 decades, ever since a chance meeting with the Dalai Lama in India, when he was traveling in India. And I'm sure Chan would be more than happy for me to bring up the fact that he was a hippie at the time with long hair.
I still am.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, that was a correction. Okay, maybe just slightly the drooping moustache? No? Okay, well, that's the difference, okay? So at that time, he was known for drooping moustache and what he describes as a Zorro-like cape, which you're not wearing tonight.
I'm flying under the radar.
Ah. Okay. You'll make your mark later. His Holiness was more than tickled by his appearance, apparently, and possibly by, in Victor's words, he'd never seen a Chinese hippie before. So, traveling with the Dalai Lama across 4 continents, they've co-authored The Wisdom of Compassion and The Wisdom of Forgiveness. Victor's also written the Tibet Handbook, A Pilgrimage Guide. Now, before tonight, I asked them all for a few key words for us all to kind of swill around in our minds for this evening's events. And his are intergenerational and gratitude. So in that spirit, please give a very warm welcome to Victor Chan. So world leaders are beginning to understand the importance of happiness within their countries, and it's undoubtedly thanks to the many years of work of people such as UBC economist John Helliwell, a former advisor to the Bank of Canada and currently senior fellow and co-director of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research Program on Social Interactions, Identity and Well-being. He has tried to measure and explain what makes for a happy city. Author of myriad books, including World Happiness Report 2013, to be released in New York on September the 8th, he is helping the UN and the OECD to take happiness as seriously as they do GDP. So the UN has just made March the 20th World Happiness Day. So when we're thinking about what to think about for tonight, he says, what could you do to make your city happy next March the 20th? And other thoughts to keep swirling around are with others, for others, hidden secrets of happiness, and take the elevator challenge, which I know we're going to get onto tonight for sure. So please give a warm welcome to John Helliwell. Charles Montgomery is an urban experimentalist and an award-winning author. His upcoming second book is Happy City. It's uncanny, the connection to tonight. It's all about how we're learning to live well in cities. He's linking urban design with the science of happiness, reporting from Kabul to Mexico City, from Abu Dhabi to Kabul to Dubai. He also likes to play at all of this. Recently, he spent time with the BMW Guggenheim Lab in New York City, and now works at the Museum of Vancouver, where he builds programs that invite folk to treat the city as a lab. So the phrases he most would like us to think about tonight include, hell is other people. Don't take it personally. I didn't. I tried not to. But anyway, he sent me this note saying, hell is other people. The more we get together, the happier we'll be.
That's John's.
Okay, so there's plagiarism right from the start. I mean, what has freedom got to do with urban happiness? How can interactions with strangers make us happy or unhappy? And is it possible to love a car? I think that was for some other one, but I let it ride. Please give a warm welcome to Charles Montgomery. So I think we should just strip it down right from the start and just ask each one of you, what is your vision for a happy city? John.
I can't resist. You've got to do the song right now.
Oh,
John.
Because it does tie together a little bit. I want you to do just a little scientific experiment for me. Are you happy?
yes.
If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. If you're happy... If you're happy and you know it, and you really want to show it, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Good group. I paused there because I was going to stop you and roll the camera back and say, in order for this experiment to work, it's not enough to clap your hands. It has to be us singing. And since you did, I can ask you, is your mood higher now than it was 2 minutes ago? Ellen? And it turns out, no. Well, we're dealing with averages here. And it wouldn't be convincing unless there were some people it wasn't true for. There are people, of course, when they're invited to sing like this, who think this is really crazy, and these people are from nowhere, and this fellow is really making a fool of himself. And there's a sense in which, in order to make cities happier places, we're going to have to learn to make fools of ourselves. To make that step out, because remember, it's so easy to be warm and open to people you know in circumstances where you feel comfortable. The nature of a big city is it's full of people who are busy and engaged with other things who barely get you into their eyesight, let alone into their eyes and hearts. And so, while in small towns where people are happier by all of these surveys than they are in big cities, it's precisely because of the human connection not being there in big cities that we have to find ways individually, and Charles is going to talk about the urban design and management issues that make this kind of thing happy. I'm going to suggest that there's lots you can do to do the same kind of experiment I did with you tonight. You can do it in an elevator, or you can do it anywhere else. Just go outside the comfort zone and don't stand as though it's a short-term prison sentence in the elevator where you read for the 43rd time the inspection certificate. But you see who's in the elevator and you start a conversation with them. And try it out. I've had people come back and report that the elevator ride ended, that someone pressed the button and they stopped the elevator and everybody just kept on talking. That's the extreme case. But at the very least, you have to convert bus rides and casual meetings, and this is especially true in high-rises and office blocks, right? A lot of people actually live in an apartment building for a long time. They live in an office building for a long time. They never know the people they share the building with. Well, that's not right. Because what the science is telling us is that people really get their happiness not from their cars, not from their things, not even from their meals or their holidays, but from the smiles and the connections and the shared life with other people. And a happy city is a city that enables that to happen. Enough.
Your song.
So I should start by saying that some of my learning on all these issues is based on my time with John and from following your work and talking to you and learning even from your pupils, as well as people who build and shape cities around the world. But I've reached this point where I feel a tension in my own opinion because I'm inclined, on the one hand, to agree with John that we should all be hugging each other in the elevator. And as a personal practice, perhaps I know I should adopt that more. And at the same time, I understand that many of us are not natural elevator huggers and may have a tough time getting there. So the happier city is a place that acknowledges that social relationships, strong, positive social relationships are the most powerful ingredient of happiness. I can say that because John has proved it. But at the same time, to acknowledge that this tension exists within all of us, the need for strong, powerful relationships at all levels, casual and intimate, but also this need to to feel the ability to pull back from each other, to have privacy. And this might play out in various ways. And I can tell a story. I'll give you the very short version. When I met a very lucky man who had bought an apartment in a branded Yaletown tower called the 501. He was a single guy. He had lots of money. He bought a room high up, terrific view, brought all his friends over, showed off the view. They left, and he was alone. After a few months there, he found that he wasn't getting the hugs and the outreach in the elevator. Perhaps he wasn't skilled enough. But he noticed that in the row of townhouses that the city had mandated at the base of this tower, these townhouses shared a volleyball court and a little garden. But in fact, that garden and volleyball court was also shared by the tower. Tower residents didn't use it. But he looked down and he noticed that the townhouse residents were always hanging out, having cocktail parties, playing volleyball, having a great time. He eventually sold his apartment, moved into a fairly uncomfortable townhouse. So there was a row of 12 townhouses. A few years later, I asked him, so what are your relationships like? How many of your neighbors do you know now? He said, I know them all. I said, well, how many of them do you like? He goes, I like almost all of them. And I said, how many of them do you love? And he said, love? You mean like family? And I said, yeah, like family. And he got a little uncomfortable, and he said, I don't know, 7? And given what some of your surveys are telling us about how many close friends and intimates people have, that's incredible. They go on vacation together now. He babysits his neighbor's kids. So I'm suggesting the Happy City is a place where, amongst other factors, design enables us to move closer or move back as we wish.
It seemed to me that what you just said is something that is very applicable and relevant to the size of classrooms. If you have a classroom of 300 people, you're not going to relate to others as readily as if you're in a seminar situation where you have 12 people. So when you move down to the podium, that number of people around you is much smaller, and you can handle that much more readily than a high tower of 26 stories. So that to me is one factor. And it's interesting that, John, you are talking about the social connections, talking to strangers. We know we are all averse to talking to strangers. I live next door here, and I walk along Water Street in Gastown, going east. There's a shop there, and there's a sign above the shop that says, "Don't talk to strangers." So I continue to walk east, and then I look back at the other side of the sign, and anybody knows what it says? It says, "You might fall in love."
That's great.
So to me, if we are a little bit more taking risk, and as you say, don't get on your high horse to assume the risk of being silly sometimes, and don't take yourself so seriously, and take more risk. That could be a kind of a cultural factor that enable more social connections. And let me be a little bit, what you call it, honorary here as well. And that is that you are talking about social connection, that this is a key factor that enable happiness. And first of all, the word happiness is full of loaded connotation to me that is not readily unpackable. But anyway, so the more social connection you have, a significant kind of social connection, the happier you are. But then, some of the happiest people I know in the world, and you know him also, Matthieu Ricard, this French monk, 3 months of the year, he isolates himself totally in a retreat hut in the mountains. No social interaction whatsoever. So it seemed to me that that's an interesting thing that I always wrestle with. Social connection on the one hand, and isolation, contemplative isolation on the other. It seems to me that if you have a kind of a balance,
Yes.
that may be another way of looking at it.
I think that's what we're all saying. Charles said it explicitly. You said it explicitly. I didn't, but I second it. And there's something you've said, and the Dalai Lama has said often, because there's within meditation there is this often an argument about how can you serve your society and the world by going to a retreat and withdrawing and contemplating to yourself. And I think I'm quoting the Dalai Lama right about this. He says the whole purpose, and Matthew Ricard is very much of this way, the contemplation is what you need to restore and build your forces and be ready, and then you put yourself to work. And I don't know how many of you have seen Matthew Ricard in action, but he's got some of the same characteristics of the Dalai Lama, that people are simply drawn to him. He has that. You talk about connection. They both have a human level of connection that's quite extraordinary, and I suspect that they build that in these periods of contemplation. There is the yin and the yang that they in fact are mutually supportive.
So it seems to me that what you need for the developer to build these towers is you ask the developer to build a cave on top as well.
Well, it is a good point to kind of work out how you build that into an urban environment, and how do you build the cave and in the tower.
Well, first of all, I want to ask, are we basically agreed that we're going to talk for an hour about social connections, or we're going to think more broadly? Because you mentioned in your own research that you call them social factors. We know that status comparisons are so very important, and this involves a question of equity in the city. And I would hate to finish up our evening without acknowledging the complexity of these webs that are created by these social relationships. Absolutely. So it's not just connecting, but it's also observing others and observing yourself within the urban space, and knowing how we're all treated in those spaces.
And it turns out the connections that are best for happiness, and they're certainly best for building social trust, which itself feeds back and makes cities workable, because social trust is what leads you automatically to let the other person go ahead in some sense in traffic, and not to get angry, but to assume the best if in fact they're taking the spot that you thought you were going to take. That the social connections that are built that are so-called bridging ones, that are with people who aren't like you. They didn't go to the same school. Is my microphone falling off?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Is that audible at this point? We'll see about credibility. The kinds of connections that are most useful for making happy cities are ones that you can make in daily life and more mixed environments than the normal ones. So that it's the connections that connect people with people you would otherwise not connect with. And that's where the elevators are good, that's where streets are good, and that's where urban spaces are good. That the kinds of system design things you're talking about, the idea of the gated community and the driving the kids to school, all of these things are separating devices. What you need are connecting devices, and most of the connecting devices, in fact, are ones that allow you to build the connections with people who are not like you. And of course, with modern cities, which are all over the world, cities are where people are living. And all over the world, cities are composed not just of people who've moved from the countryside in that country, but have moved from other countries. So they come bearing all kinds of different gifts and opportunities and starting points. But you need that much more connection with people whom you haven't had any, you don't know where they're coming from, so you may misinterpret even a smile or a gesture. So it takes a while to build those kind of connections. So it's even more important in mixed up, fast-moving cities to have these spaces and places, and harder to bring yourself to go outside the comfort zone to make the gestures.
Well, we can all talk to Vancouver, but I mean, Charles, I'm going to bring it back to you because, of course, you've done a lot of travelling. And which cities are doing good jobs at this?
It would be nice to name one city that has solved all these issues. I've been inspired by different things in different places. Obviously, if you care about freedom and mobility, you would go to Copenhagen. If you want to feel beauty and splendor, you go to Paris. It's been a while since I was in Bogota, Colombia, but this is the city that moved me the most because it's a city that suggests that rich cities in North America can learn from the developing world, that we don't hold a copyright on forward-thinking urbanism. And some of you may know this mayor, Enrique Peñalosa, who was mayor about a decade ago in Bogota. And he decided to use his city as a machine for building more happiness. And this is why I raised the equity question again, because he had a copy of some of your colleagues' earlier books at his house. And I asked him about the philosophy that drove his programs, and he just pointed to the books and said, "Oh, I'll read those." But then looking out at the city, what had he done? How had he used his 3-year term to transform his city for his version of happiness? It was all about making the city more fair. So in Latin American cities, in his city in particular, only 1 in 5 families owned a car. And yet, and this may be true in South Asia, we should probably mention it, given we're at the Indian Summer Festival, that when a poor town gets enough money to create improvements, the first thing they do is pave the roads. What that means is you have a paved runway down the middle for cars to drive very quickly on, and pedestrians, cyclists, everybody else has to sort of struggle through the rubble on the edge of the road. So what Peñalosa did, one example, is he built what looked to me like an upside-down road. He built a beautiful promenade down the middle of this road, which cars couldn't get onto. So for most people in this community, they used this promenade for walking, biking. They had those slow moments, but more than anything, they had a sense of status as they traveled, while the odd person who did have a motor vehicle was having to rumble along on the edge. Complete reversal. And he did it with their transportation system. They built a rapid bus network. He stopped cars from parking on sidewalks. He reclaimed public space from mobile vendors, saying, no, the city is for everyone. That moved me very deeply, this notion that you could make a city happier by sharing the benefits of the city more with everyone.
What about you, Victor? The cities that you've been in that you've felt have warranted being called happy?
Well, I was in Copenhagen, I think in the late 60s. And one of the most the most memorable thing that touched me at that time was an area or street that they call Strøget, which is essentially a long street with no cars. They call it the walking street. So everybody walks. There's a totally a pedestrian precinct in Copenhagen. And then I also spent quite a bit of time in different German cities, for example. And every German city I've been to always have a pedestrian precinct as well. No cars. And that is where the city get animated, because everybody congregates there. There's food, there's drinks, and when you have happy people gathering together without worrying about cars, you have kids playing on the street, you have older people strolling around, sitting in cafe. And that is an aspect that if you go to France or Italy or European countries, what you see is this incredible rich mixture of different generations coming together and enjoying the public space. Quite old people. Old people seem to be cloistered in silos in most places in North America. But if you go to Paris or anywhere else, you have a lot of mixed generation coming together. And I must say that this is perhaps begging the question and a little bit disingenuous. But the most magical cities I've been to, I would say, are places like Kathmandu, for example, in the late 60s, early 70s, where cars were not the king. You know, you go to any Asian city these days, if you have a car, you have the king of the road. You know, you don't need to pay respect to anybody. So to be in Kathmandu in those days, it was magical. And the same thing to be in Rangoon at that time as well. Basically, people who lead a much lower life, and there were no smartphones, no texting, and none of that stuff. So everything is based around interaction. But of course, you know, we cannot go back to that type of era to, you know, to emulate the kind of situation in Kathmandu or Luang Prabang, which to me is the most beautiful Asian city because of you know, I was there just a couple of months ago. Slow pace. There is a strong undercurrent of spirituality, of people giving to other people. That is very much part of that culture. So to me, altruism, for people to care about your neighbors, to care about other people around, and for those who are more disadvantaged, that they receive from other people. It's very much that tradition when I was in Luang Prabang, which is also a World Heritage Site. So cars are not dominating the city. So these are the places I think of.
I mean, I know that we can't go back in time, as you say, but I always feel with car-free days, it's like this pent-up emotion that comes out, and then suddenly everyone spills out in the street, and it's sort of there for a day of kind of connections. I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about kind of almost like car-free days. Is that a good example of bringing some joy into the city? And I know that joy is probably the wrong word, but
I like to pick up the issues that have just been raised. The notion of doing things together for other people, that the cities that Victor noted were happy were the ones where, in fact, generosity and doing things for others were the norm. And so we have to make it easier, both in the way we raise children and educate people and treat each other to make that, to get those benefits. You know, when you're fast-moving and unconnected, you don't even get the time really to think about what would be the nice thing to do for other people. We have to be quite deliberate about designing programs. The car-free day in itself is not focused on other people. It's got a bit of rollback to it, and anything that gets people out of the norm, connecting with other people, it's a little bit like a flood or a rainstorm. It does give people a chance to connect in a way they wouldn't. But to actually have deliberate possibilities for doing that, and there are a number of schemes that have occurred to me and others of linking old people and young people in ways where they're looking after each other and enlivening each other's lives. And that's equity, right? It's taking from people who are in care and saying they shouldn't be in care. It's not in care. You're not about care. These are people who deserve and ought to have connected lives. If you look at the way they handle people with dementia in Denmark, you understand why Denmark is the happiest country in the world, because the people who work in those homes and the people who are patients are busy looking after each other. It's not a question of caregivers and care receivers and patients. Everybody is involved, outside, inside, in the community with each other. And those that need a little help get a little help, but that's not the point. The real help they need is being given the chance to do things for others. Well, it's a complete reversal of moving, of the way we've been increasingly providing services and buying services and so on, and not having these gift relationships and the generosity. It's harder to flower, right? When the kids are driven to school, they don't get the same chance to walk and meet the neighbors and play and do that. That's a slightly different set of issues, but they're both important.
that was one of the words that you had right at the beginning of the intergenerational. I guess I'm trying to bringing it back to, can Vancouver be a happy city? Charles? Are there hints of it being a happy city here?
Sure. It seems as though if you look at the policy directions of the city currently, and if you were focused narrowly on, say, my concern around design, they seem to be doing everything right. And yet, last week, or earlier this week, I was at a community meeting on Commercial Drive, which is my neighborhood, talking about the emerging community plan for that area. And everybody, you all heard in the newspapers how everybody's up in arms about the towers. And it was the saddest experience I've had in my recent life. Because these policies, which I believe are sincerely aimed at, say, increasing the supply of housing, for example, and so hopefully bringing down the cost of housing, they're being viewed by my neighbors, and I have to say myself, as not a conspiracy, but certainly a method that will increase costs, housing costs in the neighborhood, and continue to be pushing families out of the neighborhood. So people told a story about families who had lived there for generations. A woman said, "My grandmother lives in that ugly old apartment down the street. What's going to happen if you build your beautiful tower next to her apartment, even if you're saving that apartment? The prices go up. And so I don't think we can..." Sorry. Living in East Van, it's hard to disconnect this conversation with and not try to drag it into a discussion about capitalism and consumer capitalism. But what we do know is that sometimes doing the right thing, making a place more beautiful and more desirable, can have the opposite effect by making it more expensive and pushing out people who maybe have lived there for a long time. And so thereby tearing apart some of those bonds that have taken generations to form. That's more of a question than an answer I have. It just left me very sad and concerned, and it made me think maybe we need to create new forms of ownership and new forms of development that we haven't yet put our finger on here.
But this is one more case where we have a issue and we're thinking of material ways of solving it rather than human ways of solving it. And so, we often think that people who lack connections or lack services will give them a facility or a building or something, and that's really not.
Well, okay, let me give a design example of how this is tackled in another place. I visited a place called N Street Co-housing in Davis, California. And it was a typical suburban neighborhood. And at one point, so Davis is a small town, though. At one point, some people in this neighborhood had a big house, and they started inviting their neighbors over for dinner. Then they decided to tear their fences down between all the yards. This was grassroots. They did it themselves. It wasn't a policy instrument. So then with the fences down, they had a super yard in between maybe 15 to 18 houses. Then they worked hard to get the city permission to make small additions to their houses so even more people could live in this area. Now, there was a little girl who I met. She's perhaps 5 years old. And she was adopted. She was from China, adopted. And her story was that even her adoptive mother left her at some point because she died. She got cancer. But as she moved towards the last days of her life, the rest of the neighborhood gathered around her in this big hug. And she started spending more and more nights at neighbors' houses. And what you saw was that the community sustained her. And by the time that her new mother died, yes, she cried, but she was not left alone. And this was a community that accommodated people with physical and mental disabilities. And nobody seemed to know where their kids were at dinner time because they were out there in the super yard being taken care of other people they trusted.
That could be done in a neighborhood in a big city like Vancouver, right?
Yes.
It doesn't require anything, right? Except what's the spark that enabled that to happen?
It was people, but they did require permission from the city in order to build their gathering house.
But they got part of the way there before. I mean, they demonstrated the viability of the idea, so it would have been a brave city planner that would have said no at that stage.
I suppose.
And I think the what we have here in Vancouver, in downtown, in the West End, is that we and the seawall, we have wonderful walkability.
Yeah.
And to me, this idea of walkability, that you can get your entertainment, you can walk to work, you can work to shop, and all of that is an important contribution to a sense of well-being. And that comes about because we have density in Yale Town, we have density in West End, we have loads of towers. So it seemed to me that developers go in there and they build their towers, and every time a new tower is built, they add amenities to it. Swimming pool, gym, is very much part of that cultural landscape in towers. But it seems to me that one way that you can look at making some changes is to look at the demographics in the tower and to create amenities that cater specifically to some of that demographics. For example, if you find that there are quite a few families, young families living there with young kids, then you can, instead of building a gym or a swimming pool and all this fancy stuff, you're looking at adding amenities that cater to young families' need, for example. So it seemed to me amenities can be much more, that could be a much more sophisticated way of creating them that create community. Because when you have a daycare in a tower, for example, and you have all the kids coming together, like what you said in Davis, then this is how you create that community. And you might also wonder, every building, a tower, you have a caretaker, you have a manager who makes sure that the place is clean and all that. What about if you have someone who is a kind of animator whose responsibility is to create programs and create situations where people can interact so that, the Vancouver Foundation talk about social isolation. Everybody in Vancouver thinks that, it's hard to make friends and so on. And I live in a tower, and I find it difficult to make friends as well. And I don't do the elevator thing that you do. But if there is someone who have their brief as part of what they do to create this, to animate the people who live there, that may be another way of thinking about reducing the isolation in these dense areas.
Change the person who was originally put in there as a guard into a social director.
Karaoke.
Why not?
Yeah.
Karaoke.
Yeah.
But we know it's important to acknowledge the power of policy, because the only reason there are 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, which can accommodate more people, and townhouses in Yale Town, is because the city has mandated those with new developments, and they've only mandated a few. Without that policy direction, it just wouldn't happen, because the returns are so much richer for selling 1-bedroom and studios.
Hence the 501, actually, was just a tower.
That's right.
Just a tower, and then it was one of the first, wasn't it? So, yeah, that's true. Maybe when you sign your lease or buy an apartment, you should also swear to take the elevator test. Should just be part of it as well. I think we should have some questions. Fantastic. I think there's a microphone. Yeah, can't see.
So, for the recording, I'm talking about Jane Jacobs' City, her book, The Life and Death of Great American Cities. And I'll continue with my question. She goes over examples of where too much hands-on planning, of forcing these sort of social interactions, which completely backfire. For example, projects in New York, where they have these buildings centered around a courtyard, which is deserted because people don't want to go there, because either they feel unsafe or they feel like their privacy is being invaded. And yet then you have families who have more ground-level houses, I suppose, that take down their fences. And it seems like the connection in the book is that you need to have ground-level entryways and interactions, basically. But what do you guys think, for Vancouver, would be the best way to go forward when we have these sort of mixed housing situations now, and we have all of these high-rises with no ground-level interaction? What do you think can be done now in the future?
There are some possibilities, I think, of making some of these buildings with very not family-friendly structures, and hence, I mean, this is one of the classic things with the towers, is that young couples move in, then they just start to have a family, and then they've built up this local network. And even though there are now in these dense areas good schools and community arrangements, there are often not very good housing arrangements for having children. And so in some of the cities that are much more mixed in where people live, like Paris, the buildings have flats of different sizes in them, and so some, even after the event, possibilities of bedroom coming off one place and being put on another, opening up the possibilities for that, if you like, a high-rise version of the laneway housing notions of creating more mix in it. On Jane Jacobs' general point of coercion versus bottom-up, there's no doubt, of course, once you talk about it in a coercive way, it's going to fail. But it has to be facilitative. You have to have public spaces of a sort that are easy to access and easy to share and easy to use to make it possible. And once you see and you have your eyes on the ball in the local communities, you'll see where these things are happening, and then you can see why they're not happening in some of the other local communities within the city and say, aha, if we did this and this and this. So even the way you organize things like recycling and so on, to have some slightly higher neighborhood place where people sort out another level of things, give them the chance to do something they want to do. People really do want to use those blue boxes or green boxes or whatever color they are in whatever city, to give them at the same time the chance to do it more efficiently and together with their neighbors would be a wonderful thing. Well, even that can be done in a high-rise. A number of these things. And maybe you need Victor Chan's energized facilitators. It's not a bad idea, actually. Yeah. If we think of ourselves, what are the groups and organizations we're into? How about if we took turns taking a role as introducing people to each other? Maybe it's probably easier, Victor, if someone in your building gave you the job one night a month.
If they pay me, yes.
You would. Not true. People get more fun out of this if they're not paid. You start paying them, they don't enjoy it. So, it's quite explicit that it's the volunteers who are I got acres of experimental results. It's the givers that gain much more than the receivers. But you would probably be persuaded, if it was your turn, to, for example, I'm going to make it a point in the lobby, every time I'm in the lobby of the building, to introduce the two people passing through. Right? Because then it's you just doing your job and you've agreed to it. Take our turns as being the facilitator of these things. So converting it, that's a very nice idea, converting it from me sort of engineering myself connections between me and others, helping other people to meet, it may work.
The other thing I'm quite taken is, that every time I'm in Spain, I always quite enjoy myself. I get a real sense of well-being. Because what I see is a lot of people go outside of their silo and they go onto the streets and they relate to other people to entertain, either with friends or to be in a situation where chance encounters, serendipitous encounters could take place. So people get away from the silos in their apartments, whatever. And it seemed to me that in Vancouver, to get away from your condo or apartments or whatever and to entertain on the street is not that viable because restaurants are expensive. You cannot always go out there and bring your friends together and, it's take a big chunk out of your salary. But last summer, next door here, the next street here is Abbott. So for, I think, a month or so, they closed off Abbott from West Hastings to Cordova. So no traffic go to that section of Abbott Street, which is right next door to Woodward. And what they do, the city, put a very long table and a lot of chairs around the table. So basically you have maybe 40, 50 chairs around this long table. And they put a DJ into that block and play music. And so what they encourage people to do is to bring their sandwich during lunchtime, bring their own drinks, and just sit there, and you have a long table, so you have the possibility of chance encounters, meeting other people, either from the neighborhood or people who just wander around. So my pet peeve is this, that Water Street is one of the most beautiful streets in the city. It's in the center of Gastown. It got beautiful trees, it got beautiful buildings, cobblestone and so on. It's the most Parisian part of Vancouver. If you close off that street on a more permanent basis, instead of just a car-free day, you have a really important center of interaction for people, just people walking around, the kind of walking street that Copenhagen have. And that is a place that, to me, is perfectly suited to create that type of atmosphere for interaction.
I can add one more thing with the sort of aspect of eating outside and having a section sort of cordoned off for people. I recently did a trip to Puglia, and they have a system where I think it's like the last Friday of the month where you go out and talk to a stranger and bring them in to eat with you, with the crowd, which was really, really fun. So you produce the food, and then you go up to people you don't know and get quizzical looks.
Sorry, where was this?
In Puglia, in Altamura, so southern Italy.
And is this a new idea?
It's a relatively new idea, but I got a feeling that they probably invited people a lot to have meals with people that you didn't know. So it wasn't that you were even just bringing your friends, you were going out to people that you didn't know. So it is always...
So I need to respond both to the question and what you said, Victor. First of all, it was the Vancouver Public Space Network who put the tables out. They were invited by the city.
Yeah, sorry.
And in fact, we are working with the Vancouver Public Space Network to do something just as cool and inviting this Saturday. My moment has come.
As it happens.
No, some of this is inspired by your ideas and this notion that we should be able to play and be more experimental with the city. So if you're hanging out on Saturday with nothing to do, come down to the to Granville Street between Georgia and Robson. We're using hundreds of giant blocks of polystyrene to build new machines for social capital.
Lovely.
And you can sit down and have something to eat, and there'll be a DJ. But just on your point about Jane Jacobs, we need to acknowledge that her work has been used as a tool, in my mind, a destructive tool at times, to put a stop to any densification. And all you have to do is look at Toronto, look out towards Canada's wonderland out in Vaughan to see the horrific results created. And there's some really powerful data coming up now that shows the dangers of urban dispersal. So I can't remember the fellow's work, but he's created this amazing kind of matrix where he can predict the possibility of two individuals meeting for coffee or whatever after work, based on the design and dispersal of their city, and they are existing in this time-space continuum, and their envelopes have to intersect somehow. And basically, he found that the most powerful influencer of whether you could actually get together after work was how sprawling your city was. So that drive out to Abbotsford, if you're being pushed there by the Jacobites who won't allow us to densify, is very destructive socially.
Another question? Yeah. Thanks.
Hello? Okay. Well, actually, picking up where we were just at about, you mentioned Spain. Victor, I believe you mentioned Spain, and I've actually just been traveling there, and I think two things I noticed when I was traveling Western Europe in general that increases kind of like the possibility for social connections and just people getting along in these really dense environments. One thing was plazas, whether it's piazzas, plazas in Italy, Spain, France. These are very essential, I find. I mean, there's just these open courtyards, lots of people getting together, and again, they have these long tables set up, beer gardens in Germany. Just any open courtyard that can be placed in in dense parts of the cities where there's lots of maybe cheap street food and cheap drinks around. I mean, I think the problem with Vancouver is much of the nightlife is in the expensive part. Like Granville Strip is quite a pricey adventure, and I feel like the more reasonable, more middle class or lower to middle class kind of gatherings are not emphasized as much, and they are kind of isolated from downtown. Like if we go to Commercial Drive, for example, there's a bit more, I would say, I guess reasonably priced fare to go to, and there's more areas that are a bit more like open and open for all classes, all age groups, and mixed generations. I think the problem with Vancouver, I guess this is my main point, is that clubbing and the clubbing adventures and all that are reduced to Granville, Yaletown, and they're meant not for all groups and not for all ages. And I also feel that maybe we could extend the nightlife time in the city. Everything kind of shuts down early, which is not the case at all in Spain. Spain, everything goes on till like 6 a.m., 7 a.m. I don't know if we have to go to that extreme, but it definitely seems like things are still happening well into the night, and people of all ages are actually still doing things and still getting along. And yeah, so what do you guys think of that? Do you think Vancouver can become one of those cities where piazzas, plazas, beer gardens can be interspersed in the really dense areas for reasonable prices?
The one thing that is really a deterrent is exactly as you say. It's expensive to go out. It's expensive to go to a restaurant. It's expensive to go to a club. But there are alternatives. So, for example, I was in the food truck festival on Sunday, and you have 24 food trucks there in a big open area. And this particular Sunday, they have a flea market around there as well. So you can shop, you can eat, you can drink, and the prices are fairly moderate. Everything is under $10. So that is, and they have set up tables and tents and so on, so people can sit together and eat as well. So these are the kind of opportunities to create more possibility for serendipitous connections.
And a city is a country of cities in itself. So every city has got. Think of the micro neighborhoods. You want to think about similar things, because your example was really a group of houses in Davis, wasn't it? That because you can start much more easily with your neighbors, and at the very, very local level. And who knows? You could actually talk to some of the people who run some of your local restaurants or places. What could we do, in fact, to make this more a community place? And obviously, the easier access, the better. So the more the tables are there, you don't have to buy anything or do anything. You can just come and enjoy people. No commitment in a sense of it has to be arranged and it has to be planned in advance. So the serendipity is a very important part of that.
It's the cultural aspect that we are under this straitjacket. So for example, I could see, let's say, in the ideal world, and rather romantic idea, that Water Street is totally closed to traffic, and that the city is putting tables and chairs gratis on the street somewhere, so people can bring a sandwich from home and eat there. So, number one, you have less domination by the car culture, that you give back the city to pedestrians. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is this really stupid, asinine way of treating alcohol.
Drink more.
Why can I not take my beer and sit down at a table like this and enjoy the surroundings. But the law says I have to go into a pub or a restaurant in order to drink. So anyway, that's my own bias. I just think that to have this very strict control on alcohol basically engender young people to think that this is something that they need to binge once they have the opportunity to do so. So in Europe, you don't have that mindset.
It depends where in Europe you go.
Yeah.
One of the one of the classic examples in social capital, the stories are told because I attend a lot of meetings around, and somebody from Norway was explaining how they run their collaborative use of spaces in their youth hostels and so on. They just leave the hut, and you go and use the hut, and you use the wood and whatever food is there, and leave things and put your money for it in the box, exactly. And the fellow who was managing the French youth hostel system was there and said, wonderful. And they went back and they changed a number of these places in the Massif Central to put in these facilities, and they were trashed. That's a related question. If the shared spaces are shared spaces in which the users have ownership in them, that they are privileged to feel that they're there, and then they'll look after them. If it's coming from somewhere else and they haven't already got the idea that, by the way, the other people using these same mountain huts are your brothers and sisters. They are us. So you have to have what's called an encompassing social identity, right? That's big enough to say, all of the people here are my people, our people. Then you're not going to trash it, right? You're going to leave it as good as you found it. So these outdoor tables will work. If people haven't yet got that level of social consciousness, and you give them the tables and the chairs and let them bring their beer, there's a risk that it's not going to work. Now, we have to take some of these risks, but you can't expect, it's much easier and better if it's organic. And the actual tables and chairs are coming from, as it were, the neighbors in Davis who are taking down their own fences and getting together. And then it'll spread out. People say, well, we could do that.
I feel while I agree with all of this, I feel that perhaps again it's because of my own neighborhood environment, and I feel so lucky to live there. There is this tremendous tension in my neighborhood right now that says, some people say, no, this space isn't to be shared, it's to be protected from those others moving in. And those others basically means anybody east of Main Street. And I think that tension represents a real truth and a real danger. I felt inequity in the city, and I wouldn't say there is a design solution, but I want to mention two things. Once, I was in Berlin last summer, and I just missed the talk by this fellow whose opinion was Berlin is ugly, and that's good. And the reason why he felt it was good is its ugliness was the only thing saving current residents of Berlin from its future residents who were going to take over. The other thing is, I have to bring back the planners here. I hung out with a couple of planners in Copenhagen who wanted to show me a park. And they said there was participatory design. So we went to the park, and there was a kids' play area, and there was this, and there were some bent trees, because apparently broken bent trees are better for sense of place. I don't know why. And then there was this crappy-looking cabin fence structure. And they said, there's a story behind that. And they said, for lack of a better term, they called these guys the drunken bums. They said the drunken bums weren't coming to the community meetings. We might call them homeless, but I don't think they were homeless. And so they decided to go down to the park with a couple of cases of beer, sit down with the drunken bums, and say, what do you want? And the drunken bums wanted their own space. They wanted their own little covered area and a little fence so that nobody would bother their killer dogs, or their killer dogs wouldn't eat the children in the park. And amazingly, they got it, and we went to the drunken bum space, and they took great care of it. They were very proud of it. And everybody seemed to get what they want from this park. But only because everybody was involved in its creation.
Lovely story.
Yeah.
Hear, hear.
Let's all be drunken bums now.
I think we've got time for one more.
Just 2 words. Bike lanes. Yeah. Now, why does that make some people so deeply unhappy?
What was the word? What were the words?
I didn't get a reaction. Hello. Hello. 2 words. Bike lanes.
Bike lanes.
Bike lanes.
Like words?
Bike lanes.
Bike lanes.
Bike lanes.
Or bike share, whatever it is. You seem to get a lot of people who really feel very badly about this. Angry. What's going on?
Good to have bike lanes?
But your question was,
That's
why
not
does
the
it make
question.
people angry?
Exactly. The question is,
Sure.
why can't we talk about and actually implement alternative structures without anger becoming part of the process? And that's it's a deep question. It's because it's a sign of, in some sense, entrenched positions being taken as inviolable too early in the game, and so people then feel threatened rather than looking for something better. And it may be that, I don't know, I mean, it's part of the reason people aren't happier is that they, through their own not thinking far enough ahead, or thinking about the overall consequences of getting their way on this, that they care not enough about the process of the civility of the process, about thinking about how we can make life better for each other in the future, rather than the particular position they're taking today. Because if they do, most people have got this sense of wanting to make things better, and if they think too narrowly and are too ready to build walls and assume the other people are bad rather than build bridges, then they get these results. And I can't just talk and make people change how they do it.
And bike lanes, if you really think about bike lanes, it's also, in a way, a fairly isolating type of experience. You get on your bike and you ride to work, or you ride for recreation, you ride for exercise. You're basically by yourself.
Yeah.
But the other component about bike lane is the fact that everybody knows that if you're moving, if you're exercising, chemicals start to course through you and you feel better. So having more prevalence of bike use because of bike lanes is a great thing. I think that people in Copenhagen are happy because they now have bike freeways, highways that go very long distances. So for me, the reading of that is that movement, exercise, confers well-being on people. And bikes, when you take bikes like this for exercise or whatever, it's like jogging. You get addicted to it because the chemicals, the opiates, come along and you feel good. And it's the same aspect in certain sense as monks or other people doing walking meditation. They walk. The movement confers this sense of well-being. But this is a bit different from a social interaction that we have been talking about.
It's funny you asked that question because I know you and I read the same book. This is Gord Price who asked the question. And you're referring, in some ways, what you're asking takes me back to the book Motordom. Was it Motordom? Fighting Traffic by Peter Norton. And he makes a point that 100 years ago, the conception of a city street was completely different from what it is now. And our conception of city streets changed, not naturally, but because of a concerted effort by a certain group, the consortium, really, of industrial interests, auto clubs and whatnot, to change the way we think about streets. So when cars first came into cities, people were very angry because those cars seemed very dangerous. They moved quickly and they were killing kids and whatnot. But they also confronted people's notions of what streets are for. So it was an affront. And I think in some ways the same thing is happening now. People are perhaps feeling as though the space which they thought is supposed to be used for one thing is being stolen by another use. And that makes me think that in many ways the city isn't just a physical object, it's an idea. And we, as one of you said, we live in a series of kind of layered cities. Everybody has their own version of the city. And unless we share the same idea of what the city is, we'll always be in confrontation about those issues.
Unless we share a capacity and a desire to make those complex things lace together rather than abrade one another.
I want to remind everybody about upcycled urbanism tomorrow. That will be endorphin hits for everyone. So I think we need to go out there and make fools of ourselves and chat in elevators, and to thank Charles Montgomery, John Helliwell, and Victor Chan very much for tonight.
Thank you.